Welcome to Series 3 of the Chill podcast. We are Chill, Callie, Heather, Lois, and Louise, and we are excited to share our experiences with you of when we hosted an intergenerational dinner this past summer. So this past June of 2023, we invited 40 people to dinner at a beautiful home in Heber, Utah. Thank you, Dina and Brian Merrill, for hosting us. On their beautiful patio, we overlooked a beautiful mountain valley that was surrounded by both the Wasatch and the Uinta mountain ranges. And while doing so, our 40 guests entered, introduced themselves, enjoyed hors d'oeuvres and drinks, and then we sat down for dinner. We had 6 round tables, and each table had a table host to facilitate the conversation and one representative from each of the 6 generations. Every table had a Gen Zer, every table had a millennial, a Gen Xer, a baby boomer, and someone from the so-called silent generation, someone 74 years or older. But I can tell you, the representative at my table did not agree that her generation was silent. Or at least that silent did not resonate with her. Anyway, at the table, the conversations focused on very specific questions. The unique perspectives and experiences that were shared by the individuals at each table inspired intergenerational creativity, and it helped us honor the wisdom of all ages. These people, who in large part had never met each other before, found the structure of the focused conversations facilitated connections in themselves that were so sustaining as the beautiful, delicious meal that they were sharing together. In the following 4 episodes, we have follow-up conversations with 5 of our guests who volunteered to join our Chill team at the Worthful Media podcast studio in Salt Lake City just a few days after our event. We have a great time sharing stories from the event and perspectives and interpretations. And this process of conversation really helps us to process what we experienced and honor what we learned at this beautiful intergenerational dinner. Please enjoy.
Good morning, Mark and Christine.
Hello.
Good morning.
Let's start by having you tell us your names and a little bit about yourself in relationship to your generation.
Okay. Should I start? I will.
Absolutely.
My name's Christine Baird. I am a millennial, born in 1987, so right on the mark. I live in Salt Lake City now, but I've sort of lived all over the country like a classic millennial. I've moved many times. I'm in my 3rd career already. So I love being a millennial. I've been sort of deeply associated with that my whole life. But now in my mid-30s, it's interesting because I'm starting to get a new take on it. So it's really fun to think about that in context of the generations around me.
I'm curious about the new take on it, but maybe you'll tell us about that a little later.
The big reveal.
Okay.
And I'm Mark. I smack dab in the middle of the boomers. And one of the interesting things when we were talking in our group is everybody at my table really did not like being defined in that way. And they had various ways of expressing what that was. So we spent considerable time talking about that. And they felt like labels always bring miscommunication and misperception. So that was one of the first takeaways at the dinner.
All of them, everybody.
Everybody, absolutely everybody. There was a Gen Z, a millennial, a Gen X, a boomer, and a silent generation at the table.
Did your silent generation member not like being a silent generation?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
She said, there's nothing about me that is silent.
Yeah.
And we met for the first time because I drove her up to the event, and she's quite loquacious, and just fabulous human being, who is she's fought her whole life for individuation and independence. So, yeah.
Yeah, my SG representative also didn't like it, and I heard that from another interview, and so I think they all say, I'm not silent.
Yeah.
So we looked it up to find out that, it's about them growing up in the Depression and McCarthyism, that, they were coming of age during McCarthyism when they maybe didn't feel it was safe to speak. So maybe they're silent about politics, and I think that's what it's referring to.
Yeah.
But I don't think any of those people were saying that. They were saying, I speak my mind. So
Absolutely.
I was particularly interested to interview you two because you were facilitators so it was the Chill women and then you two as facilitators. And so I was curious about your experience as facilitators. So the first question of our interviews is, can you give us the event from your perspective, sort of describe it in a way? But if you could wind in the fact that you were a facilitator as you arrive at the event and do whatever you're doing and sit down and all of that, I think that'd be great.
I always like to, especially upon reflection, I like to make meaning of what I experienced. And I love the fact that we had to drive to get to the Merrill's house, because it was like this coming together required various groups and ages to travel to arrive at this opportunity. It was like passing through a threshold to speak to one another. And it was great walking around and saying, wow, they did a fantastic job of getting a nice cross-section of ages. And there was their lovely representation of humanity, I guess is the best way I'd like to describe it. And the facilitating for me was incredibly easy because everybody was not shy at speaking and sharing their experiences. So I like to talk. So my goal was facilitate, don't interject too much. But the environment was outstanding. The food was nice, and everything just congealed to allow people to feel comfortable and in productive ways.
Yeah, I felt the same. I didn't understand why we were driving all the way to Heber to do this dinner, which I think for everyone almost was a long drive. But once I arrived and was in an environment that was very separate from living in the middle of a city or wherever people came from, it absolutely helped us focus on what we were there for. And I think one of my favorite parts about being a facilitator was no one at the table knew each other. Like at our table, at least, it was an absolute clean slate. And I felt so lucky to have this facilitation role because I didn't have to think about, like, does anyone have existing relationships? Am I catching up? Am I trying to make sure that it was this beautiful opportunity that I've never had before to sit at a table where I purposefully was different than everyone else and no one knew each other, and we were there for a common purpose in this beautiful situation that was away from our normal lives, that had required us to, not just hop in the car and 10 minutes later rush into something. And so I think, like, looking at the facilitator questions and knowing what my role was, I'm a lot like Mark. I could talk forever, but that wasn't my role. And it was such a privilege to make sure that a space was being created for listening, which is really what you had set up. But that was my role as a facilitator, to make sure that I was honoring the intention that we're here to listen. And it was just the coolest that everyone got to answer the same question because there was time for everyone. Everything was unhurried. People could talk for a while. They could talk for not a long time. And we all were just so overjoyed to hear everyone's response to every question. Like, there wasn't a single person that you're like, oh, I don't want to hear their response. Like, no, didn't even cross anyone's mind, because everyone had something really valuable to add purely by the fact that they were alive and had lived whatever amount of life they had lived. And so it's a joyful facilitation experience because I was conscious that I was there for a reason. I was making sure that there was a flow and there wasn't time being wasted with people wondering what we were supposed to be doing. But I pulled out of my normal mode of like, I'm just gonna have a great time and chat with people. And I just got to listen, which is so joyful, because everyone there was ready to share. And that was such a cool experience. I've been part of lots of group exercises, but very rarely have I been part of one where everyone had opted in of their own accord. I'm here to share about my life perspective, and I'm being qualified just means that I have lived the amount of years I've lived. It was so cool.
I did have one participant who, when we were going to share our accordion books, our 3 impressions, and she was sitting to my right, and we went this way, and so I heard her saying to the person next to her, I don't have anything, I'm not sharing. And then this person shared, and this person, she's totally interested, and she got more and more, and by the time it got to her, she just whipped out her accordion book and just shared. It was really cool.
Yeah, I noticed some of that too, because I was trying to make sure everyone felt comfortable. Everyone was impacted by the example set by the person who spoke before them. It was just unspoken, but very powerful. We were inspired by each other to open up.
And I was very aware that there were collectives at each table that had their own little community, but it was all part of a much larger whole, that it was whole parts.
Do you mean, like Christine said, that nobody at her table knew each other? At your table, were there people who knew each other previously?
Well, I knew Dallin, and I had just spent close to an hour in the car driving up with Kate. So, I had a little bit of, but nobody else knew one another at all. So it was a whole coming together. But I just had this sense that we immediately kind of bonded at each table, and I got that sense that was going on. But then there was a much larger, I appreciated doing the movement sort of conclusion, because I think that brought everyone back together in a meaningful way that allowed
There was that little table 6 is going to go on a cruise together, and I saw Heather with taking a selfie of her group. I thought, my phone's in my purse, which I put in the bedroom, and it was like, does my group like each other enough? Are we having so that did sort of, there was a little bit of that. And then I think getting up did mix it up again. When we arrived, so one of the things that I always have to talk myself into is working a cocktail party. It's like, it's the 30 minutes and it's the hors d'oeuvre time, and I would much rather find somebody and then lock onto them but I knew I wasn't supposed to do that. Plus, I had that little sheet that said, who the generations are, and 3 or 4 questions. And that really helped me. And people were supposed to sign it if you talked to them. So I would, I'd go up to somebody and say, would you sign my sheet? And then it was nice to have those kinds of expectations. So I was just wondering if you had, what's your beginning, that first 30 minutes?
Well, the protocols were excellent for the entire evening, I felt. And that gave everybody you arrived, and it's like, okay, what do we do? Oh, here, okay. Now we all have a reason to come up and go, hi, I don't know you. Who are you? And that broke the ice, and it kind of set up, it was almost, oh, now we have to go to the table. Oh, now we're at the table. Oh, now we have to wait. Well, wait, So I thought it was timed well. And it was, the opening was terrific.
That's so cool to hear, because we got stuck in traffic and missed the first 30 minutes.
Oh.
We literally walked in maybe 5 minutes before everyone moved to their tables. And so I had come with my husband. He was assigned to a different table. We sort of walked
table.
in, grabbed a drink, and then it was pretty much time to sit down. And I really wondered, I was a little worried as a facilitator, like, oh no, maybe I've missed something. I should have, spent more time. But the magic was you had this amazing experience. I had an amazing experience walking in cold and sitting down at a table. And I bet it's because of the energy that was already created by people who'd been there, and the fact that it was, you're right, human nature. So many of us feel like I am supposed to make small talk and be someone I'm not. But that was not the experience, because this was, again, I thought it was so cool that my invitation to this dinner had nothing to do with anything except that I had been alive for 30-something years. Like, I was qualified in a way I'd never been in any other social situation. And it was really special, and it really put me at ease. And I think I sensed that from the other members in my table, because I had not talked to a single one of them before we sat down. I missed the whole opening.
Yeah, I think the protocols worked really well too. And one of the Gen Z member of my table said, I've had lots of intergenerational experiences because my family is totally intergenerational. So every time we have a family dinner, it's an intergenerational. But she said it's never been explicit, or, this really gave you a way to be something.
Yeah.
So that she really appreciated that, and I did too. It's something about the explicitness, or maybe the intentionality, that made it easier to be there. It was like there were rules that were very loose.
Well, and that we had all signed on to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We had chosen, like a big family dinner.
Mm-hmm.
You don't always get to choose to be there.
No, yeah.
You've been recruited to be there. Yeah.
Well, could you tell us about, now that we kind of have a sense of what happened, I think we painted it pretty well. Was there something that you heard during the course of the evening that surprised you?
Yeah, the first thing I heard that surprised me, the member at our table who was from Generation X, Jennifer, we were answering the first question, which was along the lines of, what generation are you from? What does that mean to you? And what are the misconceptions that you think people have about your generation? And Jennifer just shared, well, I was born in 1970, and I think it was the most idyllic time I could have ever been born. I had the most wonderful childhood. Growing up in the 70s and 80s was so cool. Technology hadn't advanced too much to be a distraction, but there was all this fun life and art and culture and socialization. And I had never, ever heard that from someone her age. She was in her 50s, and I just realized, like, I didn't know that about growing up in the 70s and 80s. Like, how cool that she was just joyful and grateful. And, she'd raised kids of her own, so she'd seen people go through a whole other growing up time, and she had a lot to compare it to. And she was just so happy about having had the childhood and the growing up years she did. And I had never heard anyone, like, from my perspective, I mostly hear about the 70s and 80s being kind of like a hot mess, and everyone was like freaking out and having an identity crisis, and it made cool art, but also it was hard. And that was so not her take on it. And it was just so cool to hear that. And it made me so happy. Like, I'm so glad that happened, because it was before my time. I didn't get here until 1987.
Well, there was a beautiful aha that happened. We were talking about things that are surprising about your generation, and our silent generation, my octogenarian, was talking about how you get to a certain age and you feel very silent, or you feel that you're being silenced, that people don't see you. She was talking about a recent health scare and issues she was dealing with, and even in the medical industry, coming in and they're looking at her and doing the tests and things, and she's basically being treated, but, well, you've already had a great life. They're going, well, wait, I have a lot more living that I would like to do, and feeling like I'm just being placed on a shelf and not knowing where I fit in and how to interact is really hard. And my millennial said, oh my gosh, I'd never made that connection. He said, because I think my generation, that, especially when I was in my 20s, that's exactly how I felt. And I didn't have my voice yet. And so isn't it interesting to see that spiral, that it comes back around? And she was saying, yes, a life is a spiral. And, hopefully you're ascending in that spiral. And the whole group went, whoa, it was a lovely moment. Yeah.
That is so cool. It reminded me one other of my favorite moments that really, I wrote this down in my accordion notebook when we were on the second question talking about, do you have friends who are 10, 20, 30 years older than you or younger than you? Like, do you have friends, why or why not, that are in different generations? When our Karma, who's 91, who is our representative from the silent generation, she just said in the most beautiful, crystal clear, confident way, if you were a friend, you were a friend. Like it had never occurred to her a moment in her 91 years that there would be a qualification that you needed to be somewhere in the same age range to be a friend. And she had shared with us that she had born in the early 1930s, like grew up in, kind of farming towns in Utah, and just had this beautiful perspective on life, just this real joie de vivre that was so awesome and cool. And it was just so clear for her. I think she was one of the last ones to share for that question. So everyone else had kind of spoken. And then she just said, if you were a friend, you were a friend. I never thought about the age of anyone that I knew who was a friend. And I was like, well, that's going to be my motto going forward.
One of the things that came up in ours was my octogenarian was talking about feeling young and being perceived as old. She said, and I'm not an old biscuit. It was really fun. And then we started talking about the fact that our society has designed ageism in, and how it's so non-human species to put people, but our school system is set up that way. And, we do it. It's like you go to war with the other 17 to 22-year-olds, and, we build it in so that people think that normal is being with your age group rather than normal is being with an expanded group. And I was really interested in that. It's like it made these dinners or things like them reaching across generations seem really important to undo we want to redesign the misdesign of separating the generations and let them, sort of like in school, you think of a toddler as a natural learning machine, and then they go to school and they get it sort of bred out of them because of all the linearity. And I think we're natural connecting machines, and we just set it up so that we can't, and then we get all these biases and stereotypes.
I just had a thought that so much of my pressure I put on myself to appear successful only really occurs when I'm talking to my peer group. Like if someone's within about 10 years of my age, I feel an extra set of pressure to appear like things are going well, for example, professionally. Versus when I'm chatting with someone maybe 20 years older than me or younger than me, there's like this weight off me, like they'll get it. Like either they're younger than me in a point where they think I've got it, that I'm just, in a whole other realm, or they're so old, much older than me, that they know that everything I'm worried about is not that big of a deal and it'll all work out. But I didn't put that together until you just said that I find this invisible pressure I've put upon myself. It's very hard for me to be vulnerable about something I'm struggling with if I'm talking to a peer, unless it's like a super trusted friend where we have years of investment that it's okay, And I don't feel that way with people who have a lot more life experience than me, or maybe are earlier on, because I just, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, they'll get it. So,
that whole heterogeneity thing, it's like heterogeneity bonds us rather than, it's like when we're too much alike, then we compete.
Yes.
It's like, wait, I've got to muscle my space in here. I got to make room for me.
Yeah.
And our Gen Z really echoed that and said that part of the social media stuff that really exacerbates that issue and concern of, how am I doing in comparison to my group? And everybody else seems to be getting ahead. Whether that's true or not doesn't matter, it's just a perception. Another great highlight was when the millennials said, my generation really suffers from option paralysis. And everybody kind of resonated with that, and the Gen Z went, oh yeah, it's like, there's so, what do you do? How do you choose? What do you call out from everything it could possibly do and everything that's coming at you, and everything seems so fast, and trying to find a way of slowing down and being focused and centered and remembering what you want and where you're going is difficult. And so then the octogenarian said, yeah, but you have to do that. We were pushed in that regard, but you get to make that choice. She said,
that's one way to see it.
Yeah, she said, in my life, I didn't feel like I had that many choices. That I was always fighting upstream against pushing the constraints that were being, pushed upon me. She said, so everything comes with a blessing and a curse.
Which sounds like age. That sounds like the wisdom of age, not necessarily the wisdom of a generation.
Right.
Which I do think those two things get confounded a lot. The 30-year-old thinks, oh, I'm X generation, but I don't mean X, Generation X. I mean, I'm the generation I am, but it may just be that I'm 30.
Yeah.
And that when we were 30, when I was 18 and trying to figure out what my major was in college, it seemed like there were too many choices. But I do think the pressure of these smart devices and the access to the entire world of information just has, and these kids are kids, and they're just trying to have to.
Well, and educationally, we're still teaching information. We're still teaching to the, here's the textbook, here's the questions that you're going to, rather than going, how do we learn how to form questions? How do we learn to navigate the complexity of the world around us and make sense of this wealth of information that we have? So that makes it even more challenging.
Yeah. So I was thinking about how it's so important to be taught how to search for information, because otherwise you get caught in I'm not searching, this is how I do it. And I always get, then the algorithm sets you up to get the same information. And then once you search broadly, then you have to select, is this written by somebody, who doesn't know anything in his basement pretending to be or is this actual information that's credible? And we don't teach that. We do, scripted. Everybody in the district has to be on the same page in the textbook at the same time. I mean, it's just, education has got to figure out that we don't teach information like we used to. That's just not the thing.
We have such access to information. I mean, it worked beautifully even when I was growing up. You got enough information in a particular area that you were interested in, and you could have a career. Well, and as Christine just said, she's on her third career, and she's probably going to have a couple more.
I hope so.
And that's what I used to tell my students. You're going to have 3 and 4 careers. So if you keep following your dream and allowing your life to unfold, so it becomes your creative work of art, rather than trying to meet these external expectations.
And it just puts me so at ease to hear you say that 20 whatever years down the line. I'm like, oh, see, that's why I love to hear it from someone who validates the perspective. I think I spend a lot of time with my peer group being in our mid-30s. I do think a lot about how this is just normal for everybody in their mid-30s. Part of it is that we're rethinking, like, is this the career I want to be doing? I've been in it for, over 10 years. Do I feel like I'm contributing value? I'm looking for more meaning. And I realize that's probably just normal for being at this stage. But there's another layer to what you both were just speaking about, where this abundance of access to every other possible option via the internet is just overwhelming. And there's been times where I've had to pull myself back from what I call the abyss of like existential, like, I could do anything, but I can't do anything. And just say, okay, for the next couple of years, you're just going to focus on the thing in front of you and build it and see what it becomes. Because if I let myself entertain all the things, especially now that I have some skills and I have some experience that, I'm easily hireable at this point in my career, it will just, blow my brain. And instead, I've just spent the last couple of years trying to focus on the moment I'm in. I sunsetted all my social media accounts last year. I was like, we're going to just take a pause from that, because for all the reasons you stated, it was becoming unhelpful. And I am just kind of taking a different pace. And I think that that's been a powerful choice I made. And it was mostly inspired by people I talked to who were 20, 30 years down the line from me, who were like, listen, you're fine. You're doing great. It's all going to work out. Like, do the path you're on for a while. And it was just, I needed to have that perspective, because if I had stayed too focused in my own kind of peer group mind, it could have just eaten me alive to be comparing myself constantly. Was that the right choice? Maybe I should have gone this way. I could have done 5 different things. It's the path I'm on. So I've really been thinking about the value of intergenerational perspective, because it's keeping me going.
So if it is so beneficial, and I think everyone at the dinner felt like it was, and we all feel like it is, and that's one thing. And it's designed for us not to be intergenerational, to stay in our cohorts and stick in our age lanes and all of that. What are your ideas? I mean, this is one way we did it. Are there ways we could have done it better? Are there other ways that you think of? I was thinking of the fact that faith communities are pretty much the only natural intergenerational communities we have left.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, how can we, and people's commitment and belonging to faith communities is decreasing in most places. I don't know if it is in Utah, but so what do we do to make this more possible, an easier fit?
That's an excellent question. Because I've pondered that since the dinner, and I really lack ideas for that, because I thought, well, this is a great way of doing that. I walked away the next morning. I was really struck by how fortunate I've been of having so many communities in my life. Now, my mom came from a large family, had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and they all had at least 3 children. And her family all lived within a 45-minute area of one another. And my family was the outlier. So when we would go there, it was an occasion everybody to get together. And so Christmas and summer, I would have 15, 20 cousins to play with and hang out with. And it was in North Louisiana, so there were the woods and there was the lake and all of those things. And my grandparents were, my granddad knew when to pull me aside and bring me along. And, he was never particularly strict, but he, let me know things that were important. And I felt all of that. And when I got into dance, being in a dance company for, 15 years, you're a family. And we used to laugh and joke and say 1 year in a dance company is like 3 years in regular life, because it's so intense and it's always ongoing. And, we perform sometimes 160, 180 times a year. And so, and that was during the time when we were the dance touring program. And so we were on tour 3 months out of the year. And so the emotional social interaction it's like a graduate school, you walked away from that. And then teaching, being on a faculty, you have to navigate all that stuff, but especially the students. It's such a rich interchange, as you well know, Lois, but it's like, but I think we're losing some of that. And that concerns me, because, those, like the book Alone Together, the social media was supposed to bring us more opportunities to interact. And I see my grandniece and nephew sitting next to each other, and rather than talking, they're texting. And that concerns me.
I think one of the ways that I've realized I can connect intergenerationally is by investing in my actual community, which is new for me because for the first 12 years of my adult life, I was just moving in apartments from city to city, just not a thought in the world to meet my next door neighbors. I was having fun living in big cities, apartment life, not connected, away from family. And when I kind of actively decided to move out of Los Angeles, which is where I lived before my current home in Salt Lake City, I decided to move to a much smaller city. I got married, we moved into a more traditional neighborhood, I met my neighbors, I started reading the community newsletter, I go to my library, volunteer for the annual community fair. There's something very different that's happening for me now because I'm actually getting to know the people I live around. And it's so cool because most of them are from another generation than me, or it's a whole mix. And that is something I've realized is so valuable because I didn't have it for about 12 years when I was college, young in my profession, just having fun running around with my own friends in my 20s. And that's one way I've realized is actually investing in my community. And I think as a society, we're realizing how essential that is for the future of our actual culture to be connected on a local level. But another thing I've noticed is going to arts experiences that are open to the community, whether they're ticketed or not, is actually one of my best ways to mix with multiple generations. When I go to the symphony, it's very intergenerational. It's so cool. And maybe we're not chatting with everyone around us, but it's so powerful to go to music concerts, art exhibits, food events, community events that are around the arts. I think is one of my easiest ways to interact intergenerationally. Going to the farmers market, chatting with the vendors. It's this local community focus that I've realized at this point in my life is essential if I'm going to have intergenerational perspective outside of family. And that is new for me because that wasn't my mindset in my 20s or in my teenage years.
But there are two things that you did. One is you realized you wanted to have intergenerational community.
Yeah.
And then you realized that you had a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that you could turn it into a community by beginning to participate in the community aspects of that neighborhood. I love this idea of going to the farmer's market. I'm also remembering last year when we were here, we went to that dance event.
Completely.
And that was an amazing intergenerational. The kids were running on the dance floor and the old timers were incredible dancers. And then there were, people who were in the middle who were just kind of bopping around. And it was really, truly an intergenerational. And I wasn't feeling terribly social that night, but it would have been easy to talk. Everybody seemed open to talking and connecting. And so I think this thing about the arts is, and then the other thing, of course, is that schools are intergenerational communities, right? I mean, they've got faculty who are all different ages, and then they've got the kids who are, I mean, especially if we could put them back in mixed age groups or one room, so you had a broader. But then there's all their parents who are another generation. And, you could put the arts and the schools together and you could actually get an intergenerational community if people were intentional about it.
Totally.
Very interesting. So one of the things we were realizing, or some of the people were saying, is that, we've been focused on the difference, which is age, an age difference. But there are other kinds of differences. And if we're talking about homogeneity making us competitive and, like trying to define our turf, and heterogeneity giving us more room to connect and be unique and in our relationships, in relationship. So what other kinds of differences do you think, what kind of boundaries would be good to cross in intentional conversations? Because we sure don't have it.
Well, I was just down for my grandniece's graduation from high school. And it was fascinating to me to watch the struggle that she's going with through, or her generation is going through, trying to define who they are. Again, I guess it's that option, overwhelm of, she's really struggling with gender identity. And so I was talking to her about that, and she said, wow, Uncle Mark, you're the first person that understood what I was saying. And I said, tell me more about that. And she said, well, I talked to people, I tried to talk to Mom, I tried to talk to my teachers, and they want to tell me. They don't want to listen to me. They want to tell me who I am or who I should be or what I should do. And I'm so confused about, everybody says I'm this or I'm that, and I don't know, and I don't know how to figure that out. And so the more we sat and talked, she said, okay, this is starting to help me understand how I need to tease this apart. And I thought, wow, but how much of that is ubiquitous across that age group especially?
It's so interesting listening to you, because it's like, okay, given that intergenerational is a given, then we can start dealing with what some of the other issues are, in this case, gender identity. And that it's true. There's this abundance of, now it's just, you can be anything you want to be, and what does that mean? What do I
Well,
want
we
to be?
used to have access to that, like my grandparents were around, and they weren't shy about offering an opinion. And one of the things that my octogenarian said was, because she was talking to the Gen Z and saying, well, that's one of the great things that grandparents and grandchildren have, is that they have a common enemy. And she said it gives us a place that we really meet and go, yeah, they need help, and it's tough raising parents, and it's, and so it was kind of a fun moment, but we all kind of agreed with that you need that, as you were just saying, that validation of going, okay, I'm competing with my peers, but I'm getting validation by people younger or older than I am that support my journey.
Totally. And what I heard you say is that listening, being available to listen to someone else's experience from another generation, is what unlocks the connection and the sharing and the self-processing. And that was what we practiced at the dinner. And it could have been any other format, technically. I mean, dinner was lovely. But I really took that away, like talking to your niece at her graduation party and just listening, be like, tell me more. Like, she hadn't had anyone do that yet. Sitting at an intergenerational dinner, it could also be, if we go out to community events, if we're with our family, if we're with our faith community or a school educational, if you're volunteering, that practice, I think, of listening, especially, obviously we should listen to everyone, but maybe that's a way we can take this into a bigger part of our lives. Like, next time I'm sitting next to someone in the line at the DMV, and I know I'm going to be there for an hour, or the flight.
Excellent example.
Yeah, or I'm on the flight, or I'm sitting at the airport, and I notice, like, I bet that person's in another generation. I'm gonna strike up a conversation and just listen. Mm-hmm. I think that I'm gonna have a new perspective now of the value of that, because now I realize that's all it takes really is active, intentional listening. And we have an ability to hold space for each other. But I know, like I said before, I have a different level of comfort talking to someone who's another generation than me, maybe sometimes than my peer, about certain things. There's other things that I probably wouldn't talk to either of you about. I'm like, I'm only going to talk to my peer because I have a shorthand with them and I can. But yeah, that's really what I heard, the listening. Like, we have that ability, every one of us, and it's like a choice we can make. And sometimes it's structured and beautiful, like a dinner. And sometimes it's just a moment where we can choose, like, oh, I have some time with another human. I'm going to open an opportunity and hear and share perspective. That's really empowering. I love that.
There was one, I had a Native American baby boomer at my table, and she was talking about, well, she said it was great. One of the things she noticed was looking around, seeing that she wasn't the only person of color. Mm-hmm. And then later on, she talked about how they saw the generations differently, in her Navajo culture. And she was saying that the code talkers in the Navajo Nation were the people who had turned the war around, because the Japanese never cracked that code. And yet, when they came home, they weren't allowed to vote until, like, I don't know if she said the 50s or 60s in Utah. Utah was the last state, even though they're the first almost to get women to vote, they were almost the last to get Native Americans. And this whole notion, and she said, so we saw those people as the silenced generation. I don't think that's, I think that's what she said, the silenced generation. And it just made me realize that ethnic and cultural groupings, racial, ethnic, cultural groupings, is a big difference, that it all intersects with intergenerational, mm-hmm. right? But it's like, wow, other groups may actually define the generations very differently, as well as the interactions. Mm-hmm. So I think gender identity and racial ethnic identity, and I think faith is mm-hmm. another mm-hmm. one. I wish we could figure out ways to talk across political identities. I don't know how we do that, but that seems like
that's the ticket.
If we could figure out a way to have an intentional conversation that would allow us to do that, that would be.
Or have some leaders step forward that really want to allow and encourage that dialogue and break those down, rather than, well, the only way I can get elected is I have to hold staunchly to these small parameters. Mm-hmm. That's disconcerting.
Yeah, I have to say, I have very little confidence that the leaders are going to be able to do it, given the way we elect people. I think it might have to come from the farmer's market.
It all comes back to the farmer's market.
All comes back to the farmer's market, and food inequality and food insecurity and food justice.
There we go.
But I think the dinner really is a perfect venue for having these types of intergenerational opportunities, because there's something about breaking bread together mm-hmm. that there's something about sustenance that it allows and opens the dialogue, I think.
And sitting around a round table. Mm-hmm. We also, the fact that there were 6 people at each table, it wasn't mm-hmm. 8.
Yeah.
It wasn't 10. It was
a good number.
It was the right number. I mean, there's a lot of these details that when it's happening, you don't feel like it's facilitation.
Right.
But if it were otherwise, you would feel the lack of of the ease, I think. Well, it's time. We're done. We've done it. So let's clap for ourselves, because we were great. Thank you so much. It was so much fun talking to you.
In a world full of complex challenges, we need more open-hearted opportunities to express ourselves.
In a world full of heated debate, we need more open-minded opportunities to listen to each other.
In a world full of fear and anxiety, we need more chances to chill and turn toward one another.
Join us as we host conversations with educators, artists, activists, community members, and youth to surface the intergenerational wisdom we need to understand, adapt to, and solve the urgent issues facing humanity.